All right, so today we're diving deep into CQAs and CPPs. And, this is especially relevant now with all these complex botanical and psychedelic therapies popping up. For anyone who's not familiar with these terms, think of CQAs, those critical quality attributes, as like the non-negotiables. For your product's quality, think potency, purity, and stability.
Yeah.
And CPPs, those critical process parameters. Well, they're like the knobs and levers you're tweaking in your manufacturing process to make sure you hit those CQA targets.
Yeah, it's all about making sure what you're producing is top-notch, whether we're talking about a single molecule drug or something more intricate like,
A cannabinoid or a psilocybin product.
Exactly. And that connection between those CQAs and CPPs, that's where things get really interesting.
Oh, absolutely. It's like a
yeah.
delicate dance between your desired outcome and all the steps you got to take to get there.
So let's start by breaking down those CQAs. When we talk about potency, purity, safety, and stability, what are we really looking at? Especially for something like, say, a cannabis product. Okay, so potency, that's all about making sure you have consistent effects. So think about it. You've got a cannabis extract. You want to know that every single batch delivers that same level of cannabinoids to produce the intended effect. Then you've got purity, which is equally important. Purity means your product's free from anything that shouldn't be there. Things like heavy metals, pesticides, or any leftover solvents. And safety. Well, safety is paramount, of course. We got to make sure the product won't cause any unintended or harmful side effects, especially when we're dealing with compounds that have, psychoactive properties, like THC.
Right, that makes perfect sense, especially when you're dealing with products people are using for therapeutic reasons.
Absolutely. And last but not least, you have stability. That's about making sure the product stays effective over time. Cannabinoids, for example. They can degrade if they're exposed to light or heat, which then messes with both potency and purity, so proper storage. And even packaging. Those become really important CPPs. To maintain that stability...
So it sounds like, with botanical extracts like cannabis, where you've got multiple active compounds, things get even more complex. You're not just worried about the potency of a single molecule, but the balance of several, right?
You got it. Take a product with both THC and CBD. You need to carefully control the levels of each to make sure you get the desired effect. Too much THC, and you might end up with some unwanted psychoactive effects. Too little CBD, and you might miss out on the therapeutic benefits that are associated with that compound.
It's almost like fine-tuning an orchestra. Every instrument has to be in harmony for the music to work.
That's a great analogy, and that's precisely where CPPs enter the picture. By understanding how things like extraction temperature, solvent choice, and purification techniques impact those cannabinoid levels, we can really dial in that process to achieve that perfect balance.
So it sounds like there's a good bit of experimentation involved.
Yeah.
In figuring out how to control those CPPs,
Wow.
to hit those CQA targets.
There definitely is. And that's where the concept of design space becomes incredibly important. It's kind of like having a map that outlines all the safe and effective operating ranges for your CPPs.
So essentially, as long as you stay within the boundaries of that map, you're guaranteed to end up with a product that meets all those quality standards.
Exactly. Think of it like baking a cake.
Yeah.
You have your recipe, right? With the specific ingredients and instructions, if you stick to that recipe, stay within lowest specified ranges for each ingredient, and bake it for the right amount of time, you're most likely going to get a delicious cake.
But if you start messing around,
Yeah.
like doubling the sugar or cutting the baking time in half, you might end up with a disaster.
You got it. And in the pharmaceutical world, those disasters, they can have some serious consequences. That's why design space is so crucial. It's like having those guardrails in place to keep your manufacturing process on track, ensuring that even with little variations, like in your starting materials, you still end up with a product that hits those critical quality attributes.
So it sounds like design space isn't just a good practice, it's essential, especially as we move towards these more complex therapies, like cannabinoid and psilocybin-based medicines.
Absolutely. And it's something that regulatory agencies are paying a lot of attention to. They want to see that manufacturers have a really solid understanding of their design space and how they're controlling those CPPs to ensure both product quality and patient safety.
This is all fascinating stuff. We've talked about CQAs and CPPs in a general sense, but I'd love to dive into some specific examples. Let's take that cannabis extraction process you mentioned earlier. What are some of the key CPPs involved there, and how do they impact those all-important CQAs?
Well, one of the first CPPs you'd encounter in extraction is the choice of solvent. It's kind of like choosing the right tool for the job. Some solvents are great at dissolving certain compounds, but not others. ethanol, for instance, that's often used for cannabinoid extraction
Hmm.
because it's effective at pulling out both THC and CBD. But it can also extract unwanted compounds like chlorophyll, and that can affect the taste and the color of your final product. So you might need some additional purification steps to remove those.
So there's a little bit of a trade-off then, effectiveness versus needing extra processing.
Exactly. And that's where understanding those nuances of each CPP becomes super important. Another key CPP in extraction is temperature. Heat can speed up the process, but too much heat? Well, that can degrade those delicate cannabinoids, impacting both the potency and the purity.
So it sounds like finding that sweet spot for temperature is pretty crucial. Is there a specific temperature range that's generally considered ideal?
Well, it really depends on the specific cannabinoids you're going for and the solvent that you're using. Some cannabinoids, like THC, are more stable at higher temperatures than others, but generally speaking, keeping the temperature below a certain threshold really helps to preserve those compounds.
It's like cooking, right? You have to adjust the heat based on what you're making. Too high and you burn it. Too low and it takes forever.
That's a great analogy. And just like with cooking, experience and data play a huge role in figuring out those optimal settings. It's not just about temperature and solvent, though. The extraction time, that's another critical CPP. If you don't extract for long enough, you might not get all the compounds you want. But extract for too long, and you risk pulling out stuff you don't want, or even degrading those cannabinoids.
Finding that Goldilocks zone.
Yeah.
Not too much, not too little.
Yeah.
But just right.
Exactly. And once you've extracted the cannabinoids, you often need to refine them further through a process called purification. That's where you remove any remaining unwanted substances, like plant waxes or lipids, to increase both the purity and safety of the final product.
So what kind of techniques are used for purification? Is it like filtering out the impurities?
It can be, but usually it involves more sophisticated methods. Chromatography, for instance, is a common technique that lets us separate and isolate specific cannabinoids with really incredible precision. It's like having a molecular sieve that only lets the desired compounds pass through.
Wow, so you can really fine-tune the exact ratio of THC to CBD
Yeah,
in that final product.
exactly. And that level of control is absolutely critical, especially when you're developing products for specific therapeutic uses. You want to be sure that every batch is consistent and delivers those intended effects. And of course, throughout that whole process, from extraction to purification, meticulous documentation is essential. You have to keep track of every single step, every parameter, every batch. It's all about traceability and accountability.
Right, so if there's ever a problem, you can trace it right back to the source
Indeed.
and figure out where things went wrong.
Exactly. And that brings us back to design space. All that documentation and all that data that you're collecting during development, that all feeds into creating that map of safe and effective operating ranges for your CPPs.
So design space isn't just some static document. It's constantly evolving as you gather more data.
Precisely. It's a living document that reflects your understanding of the process and how all those CPPs interact to impact those CQAs.
So we've talked about extraction and purification, but I'm guessing the process doesn't stop there. What happens once you have those purified cannabinoids? How do you turn them into a final product someone can actually use?
Well, that's where the formulation stage comes in. And that's another area where understanding CQAs and CPPs is really crucial.
Formulation, so that's where you're turning those cannabinoids into, say, an oil, a capsule, and edible.
Exactly. You're taking those purified compounds and putting them into a delivery system. That's safe, effective, and ideally convenient for the consumer. And the decisions you make during formulation, well, they can have a huge impact on those CQAs.
Okay, I'm all ears. What are some of the things you have to consider in that formulation process?
Well, one of the biggest challenges with cannabinoids, especially with something like an edible, is bioavailability.
Bioavailability, that's how much of the active compound actually gets absorbed into the bloodstream, right?
That's right. And cannabinoids, when you take them orally, they go through something called first-pass metabolism, which means the liver breaks down a big chunk of the compound before it can even reach the bloodstream. So you have to formulate the product in a way that maximizes the amount of cannabinoid that actually gets absorbed.
So what are some of the CPPs you can adjust to improve that bioavailability?
There are a few different approaches. One is to use a delivery system that bypasses the liver, something like a sublingual tincture or transdermal patch. Another approach is to encapsulate the cannabinoids to protect them from breaking down in the digestive system and enhance that absorption.
I've heard of things like liposomal encapsulation, or nanoemulsions being used for that.
Exactly. Those techniques can significantly improve bioavailability, but they also introduce a whole new set of CPPs. that need careful control. For example, the size and composition of those liposomes or nanoemulsions can impact how well they deliver the cannabinoids.
So there's a lot of complexity involved in formulating these products.
Yeah.
And I imagine stability is a major concern, especially for edibles, since those might sit on a shelf for a while.
Stability is definitely always a concern, especially with cannabinoids. They're really sensitive to light, heat, and oxygen, so you need to choose the right ingredients in packaging to protect the compounds from breaking down. And of course, you got to do stability testing to make sure the product keeps its potency and purity over time.
So every step, from extraction to purification to formulation, involves this balancing act of controlling those CPPs to make sure you hit those CQA targets.
That's right. It's a testament to the science and precision involved in pharmaceutical manufacturing. And the goal is always the same, to create a safe, effective, and consistent product that meets the needs of patients.
And with these botanical products, where you have multiple active compounds and metabolites, that level of control becomes even more crucial.
Absolutely. And it highlights how important it is. To have that well-defined design space, it's like a roadmap. Especially when you're dealing with so many variables, it gives you that framework to make informed decisions, ensuring consistency from batch to batch, and ultimately, build trust in the quality of the final product.
Okay, so we've covered extraction, purification, formulation. What's the final step in this journey from plant to product?
Well, once you have that formulated product, you move into the packaging and storage phases. And these are actually more important than you might think.
Oh, really? I kind of figured as long as the packaging was sealed and, looked presentable, it wouldn't really matter that much.
No, it's way more nuanced than that. Packaging plays a big role in preserving the quality and safety of these products.
Okay, so what kind of things are we talking about here?
Well, for starters, light is a big enemy of cannabinoids. It can degrade them really quickly. So using opaque containers or amber-colored glass, those are essential for keeping those cannabinoids potent.
So it's not just about aesthetics, it's about protecting the product.
Exactly. And then you have to think about the actual material of the container. Some plastics can leach chemicals into the product over time, especially if it's exposed to heat or light.
Oh, wow. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah, so using high-quality, inert materials for your packaging, that's key for maintaining both purity and safety.
It's like the packaging becomes part of the whole quality control process.
Exactly. And then there's storage. Temperature control is absolutely critical. You don't want things getting too hot or too cold.
So what's the ideal temperature range for storing these kinds of products? Room temperature.
It depends on the specific product, but generally speaking, you want to keep them in a cool, dark place. Too much heat can speed up that degradation process we talked about earlier, but freezing can also be a problem. It can damage the product's structure and make it less effective.
So it's about finding that Goldilocks zone for storage, too. Not too hot, not too cold.
You got it. And then, of course, let's not forget about labeling. Clear, accurate labeling is super important for letting consumers know exactly what they're getting. The ingredients, the potency, recommended usage, all that good stuff.
It's about transparency and making sure people have the information they need to use the product safely and effectively.
Exactly. Plus, accurate labeling is often a legal requirement, depending on where you are. So you can add labeling to our list of CPPs, even though it's a bit different from the ones involved in the actual manufacturing.
Right. It's a CPP for communication, ensuring that all those quality efforts are clearly conveyed to the end user.
Precisely.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today. We started with those basic definitions of CQAs and CPPs,
Right.
then dug into the nitty-gritty of extraction, purification, formulation, and now even packaging, storage, and labeling.
It really is remarkable how much science and attention to detail goes into every single step of the process, from that initial plant material all the way to the final product in someone's hands.
It's all about ensuring that these complex botanical and psychedelic products are safe, effective, and consistent.
Absolutely. And as these therapies become more mainstream, that commitment to quality is only going to become more important.
And that's where that design space concept really shines, right?
Yeah.
It's like having that roadmap to navigate all these complexities.
Exactly. Design space gives manufacturers a framework for making informed decisions about those CPPs, ensuring that every batch meets those critical quality standards.
And as we've seen, those CPPs can pop up in some unexpected places, like the packaging material or even the storage temperature.
It really is a holistic approach to quality control. It's about recognizing that every step in the process can impact the final product.
Well, I think our listeners have a much better understanding now of how all these pieces fit together.
I hope so. It's a fascinating field, and with all the exciting developments happening in botanical and psychedelic therapies, it's a great time to be diving deep into the science behind it all.
Absolutely. And for our listeners who are eager to learn even more, we've got some great resources linked in the show notes.
Yeah, if you're interested in digging deeper into design of experiments or DOE, that's a great place to start. It's a statistical approach that's super helpful for identifying those critical process parameters and figuring out those optimal ranges for your design space.
It's a powerful tool for anyone involved in pharmaceutical manufacturing, especially in this new era of botanical and psychedelic medicines.
Exactly. It's all about using data to ensure those quality guardrails are in place.
So there you have it, folks. That's a wrap for today's deep dive. Until next time, keep those minds curious, and remember, knowledge is power.